Vivid verses.
The retirement dinner for Harold Pemberton took place at the country club on a Thursday evening in late September, when the Connecticut air had just begun to hint at autumn. Ryan Mitchell sat at the far end of the table, nursing a glass of scotch he hadn't ordered but had been placed before him anyway, presumably because the waiter assumed all the men at this table drank scotch. He didn't correct the assumption. It wasn't worth the energy. "Ryan, darling, you're being awfully quiet," his wife Vanessa said from 3 seats away, her voice carrying that particular note of performative concern she used when guests were watching. "Is everything all right?" "Just listening," he said evenly, offering a small smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Vanessa's mother, Patricia, dabbed at the corner of her mouth with her napkin, a gesture Ryan had learned was less about actual need and more about buying time to formulate a cutting remark. I suppose when one isn't particularly versed in the intricacies of estate planning, these conversations can be rather opaque. Ryan took a sip of the scotch he didn't want. Single malt, probably 18 years old, wasted on a Thursday. "She's establishing hierarchy again," he noted internally. "Third time tonight. The pattern intensifies when Harold's colleagues are present. She needs them to understand I'm not really part of the family's professional class." "Estate planning is fascinating, actually," Ryan said mildly, "especially the interplay between generations skipping transfer taxes and dynasty trusts. The 2010 legislative changes created some interesting opportunities for families with sufficient asset concentration." Harold, Vanessa's father, glanced up from his conversation with a former colleague. For just a moment, something like surprise flickered across his face before settling back into its usual mask of polite disinterest. Patricia's napkin paused halfway to the table. "Yes, well," she said after a beat. "I'm sure you've picked up bits and pieces over the years." Not a concession, Ryan analyzed. A retreat with face-saving language. She can't acknowledge competence without undermining 16 years of careful narrative construction. The dinner progressed through its predictable stages. Appetizers arrived, seared scallops with some sort of reduction that Ryan suspected was meant to be more impressive than it actually tasted. Conversations circled through the expected topics: the upcoming board election at Harold's old firm, the renovations to the tennis courts, speculation about whether the Hendersons would finally sell their summer house in the Berkshires. Ryan contributed when directly addressed, kept his observations concise, and watched. He'd become exceptionally good at watching. Vanessa's brother, Tyler, sat across from him, already on his third bourbon despite the meal having barely started. Tyler had his mother's sharp features but none of her discipline, a combination that had resulted in a man who looked perpetually on the verge of saying something he'd later regret. Usually he did. "So, Ryan," Tyler said, leaning back his chair with the practiced casualness of someone about to say something deliberately provocative. "How's the paperwork business treating you?" Still shuffling those riveting compliance documents. Here we go, Ryan thought. Blood alcohol content probably 0.15. Impulse control diminished. He needs to establish dominance in front of Dad's colleagues, because the Greenwich investment fund he's consulting for is probably circling the drain again. "It keeps me busy," Ryan said simply. "I bet it does." Tyler swirled his bourbon. "Must be nice having such a straightforward career path. No complex strategy, no high-stakes negotiations. Just dotting I's and crossing T's." "Someone has to," Ryan replied, his tone unremarkable. Vanessa laughed, a bright, crystalline sound calibrated for public spaces. "Oh, Tyler, don't tease. Ryan's work is very important. I mean, someone has to make sure all those tedious regulatory forms get filed on time." "She's joining the attack," Ryan observed. "Interesting. Usually she maintains plausible deniability in front of her father's professional circle." The alliance shift suggests either increased confidence in her position or decreased concern about my reaction. Probably both. He'd first met Vanessa 17 years ago at a charity art auction in Manhattan. She'd been standing in front of Rothko, head tilted in that way people adopt when they're supposed to be contemplating abstract expressionism, but are actually wondering if they're being watched. She was beautiful in the way that expensive things are beautiful. Carefully maintained, precisely presented, aware of her own value. "What do you see?" she'd asked him, not looking away from the painting. "A reliable investment," Ryan had answered honestly. The market for mid-century American modernism has shown consistent appreciation over the past 2 decades. She'd laughed then, genuinely surprised. Most people say something about emotional resonance or the nature of human consciousness. Most people don't know what they're looking at. She turned to face him fully. "And you do. I know what the data suggests. The rest is aesthetics." 6 months later, they were engaged. Her family had been skeptical. Ryan came from normal people. His father had been a high school chemistry teacher, his mother a librarian. He'd paid his own way through Northwestern, worked as a teaching assistant, graduated without connections or pedigree. But he was smart, undeniably smart, and Vanessa had been in the throes of rebellion against her mother's carefully curated selection of suitable bachelors from suitable families. Dating Ryan had felt transgressive, exciting, like slumming with an intellectual edge. The wedding had been at the Pemberton estate in Greenwich, 300 guests, a string quartet, imported champagne. Patricia had smiled through the entire ceremony with the pained expression of someone enduring a root canal with insufficient anesthesia. The marriage itself had been functional. For a while. Vanessa liked having an intelligent husband, liked bringing him to dinner parties where he could hold his own in conversations about policy or economics. She liked the validation that came from being married to someone clearly smart, even if that intelligence wasn't paired with the right last name or the right undergraduate institution. What she didn't like, what had eventually curdled into something harder and more bitter, was when that intelligence made other people take notice. The first real fracture came at a fundraiser for the Riverside Arts Collective 4 years into their marriage. Ryan had been cornered by Catherine Ashford, a prominent patron whose family had endowed half the museums in New England, and they'd fallen into a conversation about the structural challenges facing mid-sized cultural institutions in an era of declining public arts funding. Ryan had made some observations about diversified revenue streams and strategic partnerships with corporate sponsors. Catherine had been genuinely engaged, asked follow-up questions, requested his contact information. On the drive home, Vanessa had been silent for 20 minutes before finally saying, "You don't need to perform like that." "Like what?" "Like you're trying to prove something. Catherine Ashford doesn't need to hear your theories about arts administration. She's been doing this for 30 years. She asked my opinion. Because she was being polite, Ryan. That's what people do at these events. They make conversation. They don't actually want to be lectured by someone who works in compliance." There it is, he'd thought at the time. The first explicit articulation. I'm allowed to be smart in private, as her personal resource. But in public, I'm supposed to remember my place. He'd said nothing, just watched the lights of Greenwich blur past the window. The pattern had repeated, intensified. Whenever Ryan demonstrated expertise, showed capability beyond what Vanessa had decided was his designated role, her resentment crystallized a little more. It didn't matter that he was helping, that he was making her family's life easier. What mattered was that he was succeeding in ways that didn't fit the story she'd told herself about their marriage. The story where she had married down, chosen passion and intelligence over pedigree, and was therefore owed constant acknowledgement of her benevolence. The story where Ryan was supposed to be grateful, not competent. Back at the retirement dinner, dessert had arrived. something architectural involving dark chocolate and gold leaf. Tyler was explaining his latest investment thesis to anyone who would listen, words slurring just slightly at the edges. "The thing about emerging markets," he said, gesturing expansively with his dessert fork, "is that you need to have the stomach for volatility. Weak hands get shaken out. But if you've got conviction, real conviction based on fundamental analysis, the returns are astronomical." Ryan knew, for a fact, that Tyler's fundamental analysis consisted primarily of reading headlines and making impulsive trades based on gut feeling. He'd seen the account statements 6 months ago when Tyler had needed someone to help him understand why his broker was sending increasingly urgent emails about margin calls. Ryan had restructured the portfolio quietly, moved Tyler into more stable positions, personally covered the immediate shortfall to prevent a catastrophic liquidation event. Tyler had never acknowledged the help, had probably never even understood what had actually happened, just knew that somehow the crisis had resolved itself. Just like all the others, Ryan thought, because there have been others. So many others. The tax issue with Harold's consulting income from his former firm, misclassified as capital gains when it should have been ordinary income. Ryan had caught it, filed amended returns, negotiated the penalty structure with the IRS examiner assigned to the case. The regulatory complaint from a former client of Patricia's boutique wealth management practice, alleging unsuitable investment recommendations. Ryan had drafted the response, compiled the documentation demonstrating proper disclosure and fiduciary compliance, made the problem disappear before it reached formal proceedings. The issue with the family trust's real estate holdings, a Byzantine tangle of improperly documented transfers and questionable tax basis calculations going back 15 years. Ryan had spent 8 months reconstructing the entire chain of transactions, prepared comprehensive substantiation files, paid a forensic accounting firm out of his own pocket to validate the positions. None of them knew about most of it. That was the point. Ryan had learned early that the Pembertons didn't want to see the machinery that kept their life running smoothly. They wanted to believe their success was inevitable, a natural consequence of their breeding and judgment. Showing them the problems he was fixing would force them to acknowledge they'd made mistakes in the first place. So he'd worked invisibly, the ghost in their machine, patching holes and averting disasters while they glided through charity events and business lunches, blissfully unaware of how many times their world had been hours away from collapse. "Ryan, you're drifting again," Vanessa said, her voice sharp with irritation thinly disguised as concern. "Am I?" He refocused on her face. "My apologies. We were discussing the summer plans. Mother and Dad are thinking of renting a villa in Tuscany for August. Family trip. Interesting timing," Ryan noted. "August is when the amended trust documents need to be filed with the probate court. She knows I know that. This is a test. Either I object and reveal that I'm tracking their legal obligations more closely than I'm supposed to, or I agree and she gets to complain later that I didn't warn them about the deadline." "Sounds wonderful," he said neutrally. Patricia's eyes narrowed infinitesimally. She'd been expecting resistance, had prepared a response. His easy agreement had disrupted her script. The dinner wound down. Coffee was served, ignored, cleared away. Harold's colleagues made their polite departures, handshakes and promises to lunch that would probably never materialize. The check was handled invisibly. The club billed everything to Harold's account. On the drive back to the house they shared in West Hartford, Vanessa stared out the window at the passing darkness. "You were embarrassing tonight," she said finally. Ryan kept his eyes on the road. "How so?" "That comment about estate planning. Dynasty trusts. You were showing off." "No," he thought. "I was deflecting your mother's condescension. But you can't acknowledge that she was attacking me because then you'd have to choose between defending me or agreeing with her, and we both know which way that choice would go." I'll be more careful, he said. You do this, Vanessa continued, her voice rising slightly. You do this thing where you act like you're just as sophisticated as everyone else, like you belong in these conversations. But you don't, Ryan. You're not one of them. You never will be. Interesting, he analyzed clinically. The them now explicitly excludes me, but includes her. The identity consolidation is complete. She's fully rejoined her tribe, and I'm the outsider again. I understand. Do you? She turned to face him. Do you really? Because I don't think you do. I think you've spent so many years pretending to be something you're not that you've actually started to believe it. Ryan pulled into their driveway, put the car in park. What would you like me to do differently, Vanessa? I want you to stop making me look ridiculous. Every time you demonstrate some piece of knowledge my parents don't think you should have, it reflects poorly on me. Like I chose wrong. Like I married someone who doesn't know his place. There it is, he thought. The core grievance, finally articulated without euphemism. I've committed the unforgivable sin of being competent in ways that complicate her narrative. I see, he said quietly. They went inside. Vanessa disappeared upstairs immediately. Ryan stood in the foyer for a long moment, then walked to his study, the small room at the back of the house that he'd converted into a workspace years ago. He sat down at his desk and opened his laptop. 63 unread emails. Most of them routine, a few that would require immediate attention. He scrolled through them methodically, flagging the urgent items. One from the forensic accounting firm he'd retained last year to help clean up Tyler's latest disaster. Something about improperly documented cryptocurrency transactions that could potentially trigger money laundering alerts if not handled correctly. They needed authorization to continue their work into the next billing cycle. Another from the attorney handling the trust documentation issues, asking about the best timing for filing the amended instruments to minimize the chance of probate court scrutiny. A third from an IRS examiner, a polite but pointed inquiry about certain deductions claimed on Harold's consulting business returns that seemed inconsistent with the reported business activity. Ryan had been handling all of it, every potential crisis, every looming disaster. He'd been the invisible hand keeping their world stable, and they'd never once asked how he managed it. They just assumed it wasn't difficult. That compliance work was simple, boring beneath their notice. He drafted responses to the most urgent emails, authorized the accounting firm's continued work, scheduled a call with the trust attorney. Then he leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. 16 years. 16 years of quiet competence, invisible protection. 16 years of condescension and contempt. 16 years of being tolerated in his own marriage. The thought that had been forming at the edges of his consciousness for months finally crystallized into something hard and clear. What happens, he wondered, if I stop? Not dramatically. Not with confrontation or ultimatums. Just stop. Stop intercepting the problems. Stop paying the forensic accountants. Stop filing the amended returns and negotiating with examiners and restructuring Tyler's catastrophic portfolios. Stop being the invisible shield between the Pembertons and the consequences of their own incompetence. He sat with the thought for a long time, testing it for flaws. The risks were minimal for him personally. He'd been careful never to put his own name on any of their questionable positions. The legal exposure was entirely theirs. The destruction would be biblical. The IRS inquiry alone would unravel into a full audit within weeks. The cryptocurrency issue would trigger FinCEN reporting requirements that would cascade into investigations. The trust documentation problems would expose decades of questionable tax positions. And none of it would involve him doing anything illegal or even unethical. He would simply stop doing work he'd never been asked to do, stop solving problems they didn't know they had. Ryan pulled up his personal files, began methodically organizing them. Documentation of every fire he'd put out, every crisis he'd averted. Correspondence with forensic accountants, tax attorneys, regulatory examiners. Records of personal funds he'd advanced to cover shortfalls and penalties. Not because he planned to use any of it. That would be messy, would require him to engage with their inevitable fury and confusion. But because completeness mattered to him. By the time he finished, it was nearly 3 in the morning. Upstairs, he could hear the faint sound of Vanessa's breathing in sleep. He stood in the doorway of their bedroom for a moment, watching her. She looked peaceful, unburdened, secure in her world, confident that tomorrow would be like yesterday, that the natural order would persist. It won't, he thought, but you won't know that until it's far too late. He slept in the guest room that night. Vanessa didn't notice. The next morning, Friday, Ryan went through his usual routine. Coffee, shower, the drive to his office in downtown Hartford. The day proceeded normally. Meetings about regulatory updates, review of compliance documentation for a pharmaceutical client, lunch at his desk. At 2:30 p.m., his phone rang. Vanessa. He let it go to voicemail. She called again at 2:45, then 3 o'clock, then 3:15. At 3:30, she sent a text. We need to talk. Tonight. Important. Ryan texted back. Dinner meeting with clients. We'll be late. There was no dinner meeting. He went to a quiet restaurant in West Hartford Center, sat at the bar, ordered food he barely tasted. His phone continued to vibrate with increasing frequency. When he finally returned home at 9:30, Vanessa was waiting in the living room, her laptop open, her face pale. Where have you been? She demanded. I texted you. Client meeting. Until 9:30? On a Friday? Compliance work doesn't respect the clock. He set his briefcase down carefully. What's wrong? What's wrong? Her voice pitched upward. What's wrong? Tyler called in a complete panic this afternoon. Apparently, there's some issue with his cryptocurrency accounts. Something about suspicious activity reports and potential Treasury Department involvement. He's freaking out, Ryan. And Dad got some letter from the IRS about his consulting business, something about an examination that could go back 3 years. Faster than I expected, Ryan noted. The examiner must have already been preparing the formal notice. Probably would have been delayed if I'd made the call I'd planned for next week. But I didn't make that call. That sounds stressful, he said evenly. Stressful? Vanessa stood up. Ryan, this is serious. Tyler thinks he could face federal charges. And Dad is talking about hiring a tax litigation firm, which apparently costs something like $500 an hour. Tax litigation is expensive, Ryan agreed. Can you help them? And there it is, he thought. The first time in 16 years, she's explicitly asked me to use my expertise on behalf of her family. Only now, when the crisis is already in motion and she needs something from me. I'm not sure what I could do, he said mildly. I work in pharmaceutical compliance, not cryptocurrency regulation or tax litigation. But you understand this stuff. You know how these systems work. I know some things. I don't know if it would be relevant. Vanessa's expression hardened. This isn't the time for false modesty, Ryan. My family needs help. Then they should hire qualified counsel. You mentioned tax litigation specialists. That seems appropriate. We need more than that. We need someone who can actually figure out what's happening, cut through all the legal jargon, and explain the real exposure. Ryan noted, not they. The family identity now explicitly includes her, but excludes me, even as she's asking for my help. I'm sure they'll figure it out, he said. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. Are you being deliberately obtuse right now? This is my family, Ryan. I need you to help them. I heard you. Then why are you acting like this? Like what? Like you don't care. Like it doesn't matter that Tyler might be facing criminal charges or that Dad could lose his entire retirement savings and IRS penalties. Ryan walked to the kitchen, poured himself a glass of water. When he turned back, Vanessa was standing in the doorway, her arms crossed. "I've been thinking," he said quietly, "about our conversation last night." "What?" "You were right. I don't belong in those conversations. I'm not one of them. I should stop pretending otherwise." Confusion flickered across her face. "This isn't about last night. This is about my family needing help right now. I understand, and I'm sure they have the resources to hire excellent legal representation. I'm not talking about legal representation. I'm talking about you actually stepping up for once, actually being part of this family instead of sitting on the sidelines with your boring paperwork." "Interesting," Ryan analyzed. She still doesn't see it. Still doesn't understand that the boring paperwork was the only thing standing between her family and catastrophic legal exposure. "I think," he said carefully, "that you and I might need some space to reconsider our arrangement." Vanessa's expression went very still. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that you've made it clear I don't fit into your world. And I think you're right. I think perhaps we've both been trying to sustain something that stopped working a long time ago." "You're not serious." "I am. Over one argument. Over me asking you to help my family. Over 16 years of being tolerated instead of valued." Her face flushed. "That's not fair, isn't it? Your exact words last night were that I don't know my place, that I embarrass you, that I make you look ridiculous." I was upset. People say things when they're upset. "They do," Ryan agreed. "Usually true things they've been thinking for a while." "So what? You just gonna leave? Just like that?" "I think it would be best. For both of us." Vanessa's shock was giving way to anger now. "This is because I wouldn't defend you against my mother at dinner, isn't it? You're punishing me for that." "No," Ryan thought. "I'm simply withdrawing protection you never knew you had. But explaining that would require acknowledging all the work I've been doing invisibly, and I've decided I'm done with invisible work." "I'm not punishing anyone," he said. "I'm recognizing reality. The reality that you're a coward who runs away the first time things get difficult, if that's how you see it." She stared at him, breathing hard. "You really are this petty? This vindictive?" "I'm practical," Ryan said. "And I think we've both known for a while that this marriage was a mistake. I'm just the first one willing to say it out loud. Get out. I'll pack some things and stay at a hotel tonight. We can discuss logistics." "No, I mean get out. Now. I don't want you in this house another minute." Escalation, he noted. Typical response when control is threatened. Make it my fault. Frame it as her decision. Maintain the power dynamic even as the relationship dissolves. "All right," he said simply. He went upstairs, packed a single bag with essentials. Vanessa didn't follow him, just stayed in the kitchen, her breathing audible from the second floor. When he came back down, she was on the phone. He heard her say, "Completely blindsided me," just announced he was leaving, before he closed the front door behind him. Ryan drove to a hotel near the airport, checked in, sat on the edge of the bed in the anonymous room. His phone was already lighting up. Texts from Vanessa's family members, each one following the same pattern. Shock, condemnation, demands for explanation. He turned the phone face down on the nightstand and went to sleep. The weekend passed in a blur of silence. Ryan stayed in the hotel, ordered room service, caught up on reading he'd been meaning to do for months. His phone continued to vibrate intermittently with calls and texts he didn't answer. Monday morning, he went to his office, worked through his normal routine, client meetings, documentation review, regulatory update briefings. Professional, focused, unremarkable. At 9 a.m., his phone rang. Patricia Pemberton. He answered. "Patricia, what the hell have you done?" Her voice was ice over fury. "I'm not sure what you mean. Tyler is facing potential federal charges. Harold has IRS examiners threatening to audit every return going back 7 years. There are letters from the probate court about the family trust. And you just walk away? Just abandon us in the middle of all this?" "Abandon," Ryan noted. Interesting word choice. Implies I had a responsibility I'm shirking, rather than acknowledging I was never actually asked to shoulder these burdens in the first place. I'm sorry you're dealing with those challenges, he said evenly. Sorry? You're sorry? Ryan, we need your help. Whatever issues you and Vanessa are working through, they need to be set aside. This is bigger than your marriage problems. I don't think I can help you. Of course you can. You understand all this regulatory nonsense. You can explain it, help us figure out what we're actually dealing with. I think you should consult with qualified legal counsel. We have legal counsel. We need someone who can actually cut through the bullshit and tell us the truth about our exposure. Truth, Ryan thought. That's almost funny. You spent 16 years making it clear you don't value my truth, and now you're demanding it on your timeline. I'm sure your attorneys are competent, he said. Ryan, listen to me very carefully. I don't know what Vanessa said to you, but this family has been good to you. We welcomed you, supported you, gave you opportunities you never would have had otherwise. You owe us. There it is, Ryan thought. The explicit articulation of the transactional framework that's been implicit all along. They gave me access to their world. Therefore, I owe perpetual gratitude and service. I don't think I do, he said quietly. Excuse me? Oh, you. I don't think I do. Silence on the line. Then, you're making a very serious mistake. Perhaps, when Vanessa files for divorce, and she will, you're going to regret burning these bridges. We have resources, Ryan. Legal resources. We can make things very difficult for you. Threat escalation, he noted. Standard pattern when dominance is challenged. But there's nothing they can actually threaten me with. I've been careful never to entangle myself in their legal exposure. Understand, he said. Is there anything else? You'll regret this. She hung up. Ryan set his phone down, returned to the compliance documentation spread across his desk. Pharmaceutical regulatory frameworks were complex but internally consistent. You followed the rules, documented your processes, maintained proper controls. Unlike families, they made sense. The calls continued throughout the day. Tyler, desperate and panicked, babbling about Treasury investigations. Harold, attempting a more measured approach, suggesting they talk this through like reasonable men. Vanessa, oscillating between rage and appeals to shared history. Ryan didn't engage beyond polite acknowledgement. There was nothing to discuss. By Tuesday afternoon, the panic in their voices had intensified. The forensic accounting firm had apparently stopped returning calls because Ryan had halted their engagement and wasn't there to authorize continued work. The attorney handling the trust documentation was asking questions they couldn't answer about basis calculations and transfer dates. The IRS examiner had expanded the scope of Harold's audit based on inconsistencies in the supporting documentation. Every fire Ryan had been putting out was now burning freely. Wednesday morning, he received an email from Vanessa's divorce attorney, a predictably aggressive firm that specialized in high-net-worth dissolutions. The letter threatened protracted litigation, suggested Ryan would be responsible for her legal fees, implied various forms of financial misconduct. Projection, he thought. They assume I must have been engaged in the same questionable practices they were, because they can't imagine someone operating with actual competence and ethics. He forwarded the letter to his own attorney, a quiet woman who specialized in family law and had a reputation for clinical efficiency. Thursday, the first news story broke. A small item in the Hartford Business Journal about an IRS investigation into a prominent Greenwich family's consulting business. No names, but enough details that anyone familiar with the Pembertons would recognize the reference. Friday morning at 8:45 a.m., Ryan's phone rang. Vanessa. He answered. You did this. Her voice was raw. You knew about all these problems, and you just walked away. I stopped doing work I was never asked to do, Ryan said evenly. You were sabotaging us the entire time, weren't you? waiting for your chance to destroy everything. Interesting theory, he thought, but incorrect. I was actually protecting you from yourselves, which is somehow the more unbearable truth. I was fixing problems you created, he said quietly, for 16 years. Problems you didn't even know you had. Silence. What are you talking about? Her voice was smaller now. Tyler's cryptocurrency transactions. I restructured them last year to avoid money laundering flags. Harold's consulting income. I've been filing amended returns and negotiating with examiners for 5 years. The family trust. I spent 8 months documenting transfers and paid a forensic accounting firm $120,000 out of my own pocket to validate your basis positions. You're lying? I'm not. I have documentation of everything. Every payment, every filing, every negotiation. I've been the only thing standing between your family and complete legal collapse. And you never knew because I made sure you wouldn't have to. Why would you do that? Because I thought. He paused, considering. I thought it mattered. I thought maybe if I was valuable enough, useful enough, I'd eventually stop being the embarrassment you married and become part of the family. Ryan, but I was wrong. No amount of competence would ever make me belong, because belonging was never actually about what I did. It was about who I am, and I'll never be one of them. If you knew about all these problems, why didn't you tell us? Would you have listened? Would your mother have accepted that her wealth management practice had regulatory exposure? Would Tyler have acknowledged that his investment genius was actually a series of catastrophic mistakes I was quietly cleaning up? Another silence. What happens now? Vanessa asked. Now you deal with the consequences of your own decisions. You hire competent legal counsel. You probably pay substantial penalties. You might avoid criminal charges if you cooperate fully with the investigations. And you just walk away? Yes. After everything you've made clear, I'm not really part of your family? Yes. I walk away. He heard her breathing on the other end of the line. I never understood, she said finally. I never understood what you actually did. I know. Would you help us? Now, if we asked properly. Interesting question, Ryan thought. Do I leverage this into some kind of negotiated settlement where they acknowledge my value? Extract apologies and recognition? No, that would require caring about their opinion. And I've discovered that I don't anymore. No, he said simply. Why not? Because I'm done being invisible. Done protecting people who despise me from problems they don't even know they have. Done being the boring paperwork guy who embarrasses you at dinner parties. Ryan, please. My father could lose everything. Then he should have been more careful with his tax positions. Should have supervised Tyler instead of giving him access to family money. Should have documented his trust transfers properly. This is revenge. This is absence, Ryan corrected. Revenge would require me to do something to harm you. I'm simply not doing anything to help you anymore. There's a difference. People could go to jail. Then they should cooperate with investigators and negotiate plea agreements. I'm sure your expensive attorneys know how to handle that. You really don't care at all? Ryan considered the question honestly, searched himself for some echo of the concern he'd felt for years, the drive to protect them that had consumed so much of his time and energy. Found nothing. No, he said. I really don't. You're a bastard. Probably. But I'm a bastard who's no longer your problem. He hung up. The next several weeks proceeded with the grim inevitability of dominoes falling. The Hartford Business Journal story was picked up by larger outlets. The SEC opened a formal investigation into Patricia's wealth management practice based on the IRS referrals. Tyler's cryptocurrency issues escalated into actual Treasury Department involvement. Ryan watched from a distance, the same way you might watch a storm from inside a warm house. The divorce proceedings were surprisingly straightforward. Vanessa's attorneys had started aggressive, But as the full scope of the Pemberton family's legal crisis became apparent, their posture shifted. They had bigger problems than fighting over marital assets. Ryan's attorney negotiated a clean split. No alimony. The marriage had been relatively short by Connecticut standards, and both parties had independent income. Assets divided equitably, which in practice meant Vanessa kept the house and most of the wedding gift from her family, while Ryan kept his retirement accounts and the clean conscience of someone who'd never participated in their questionable financial practices. He signed the papers in November, 3 months after walking out. The attorney's office was in downtown Hartford, sterile and professional. Vanessa wasn't there. They'd arranged separate signing appointments. "You're sure about this?" his attorney asked, reviewing the final documents. "There's no going back once these are filed." "I'm sure," Ryan said. He was. 6 months later, Ryan sat in a coffee shop in Portland, Oregon. He'd taken a new position with a medical device company, compliance director with actual authority, and a team that reported to him. The work was challenging, the city was beautiful, and nobody knew anything about his former life beyond what appeared on his resume. His phone buzzed. An email from an address he didn't recognize. Subject line, "You were right." He opened it. "Ryan, I don't expect you to respond to this. I'm not even sure why I'm writing it, except that I need to say some things I should have said months ago. The IRS investigation concluded last week. Dad's paying a substantial penalty, but avoided criminal charges. Tyler wasn't as lucky. He's looking at probation and fines, but it could have been much worse. Mom's practice is effectively finished. Too much reputational damage. Our attorneys finally explained everything you've been doing. The amended returns, the forensic accounting work, the money you'd personally covered. They showed us documentation going back years. I never knew. I know that sounds impossible, that I should have known, but I didn't. I just thought. I don't know what I thought. That these things resolve themselves. That problems weren't actually as serious as they seemed. I understand now why you left. Why you stopped helping. We treated you terribly, and you protected us anyway, and we never even noticed. I'm sorry. For all of it. For my mother's condescension. For Tyler's mockery. For my own blindness. You deserved so much better than what we gave you. I hope you're well, wherever you are. I hope you found people who actually see your value. Vanessa." Ryan read it twice, then closed the email without responding. Outside the coffee shop window, Portland's spring rain fell steadily. People hurried past with umbrellas, briefcases, coffee cups. Normal people living normal lives, unburdened by the weight of maintaining someone else's illusions. He returned to his laptop, to the compliance framework he'd been drafting for the new product launch. The work was clean, structured, solvable. Somewhere across the country, the Pembertons were dealing with the consequences of their own decisions, finally seeing clearly the problems that had always been there. And Ryan was exactly where he'd chosen to be, visible, valued, and completely, contentedly free.
Thanks for listening.